All right, today is a lunch and learn lecture called Speech and Language in Parkinson's Disease. Our speaker is Sarah Tallett, a speech therapist and an active member in the PNMD community. Okay, I'm Rick Stevens. I'm the president of the Parkinson Network of Mount Diablo. Sarah Tallett, today's speaker, not only is a speech and language therapist, but is also a PNMD board member. So every month we try to bring you a topic of interest called the Lunch and Learn Seminar.
Okay, thanks, Rick. Hi,
Sure.
all. I'm Sarah, as Rick mentioned. I've been practicing as a speech pathologist for about 17 years, working with a range of different settings and adults and children. But what really spurs my interest and motivation in Parkinson's is that my father, Matt, was diagnosed in January of 2019. So at that time, I made a kind of a career shift back to working with adults, which I thoroughly enjoy. And that is when I believe it was the summer of 2019, after his diagnosis, that I learned of the Speak Out program, and I professionally went through the training so that I could support my father and then other folks in the community. So that's kind of a little bit about me. I'm a speech pathologist here in Walnut Creek, and I try to stay active in the community. As Rick mentioned, I'm on the board as the membership chair. And I also have a young family, two little boys, Colton and Benjamin, who are 9, almost 10, and a 7-year-old. So life is busy, but I'm happy to be here today, and I'm hopefully going to do this smoothly. I'm going to try to share my screen with you all and move things around. And then I'm going to click this into presentation mode here so we can see. So this is my name and information, and I do have it again at the end, my contact information. One second. Uh-oh. Hey, Rick, are you able to stop the screen sharing? Because I'm kind of stuck. Okay, there we go. Let me see if we can get this to work. Well, this may not be as pretty. I'll try it again. I want to be able to advance.
Yeah, don't worry about it being pretty, as long as the content is solid.
Yeah, the content is great. It's just a matter of being able to access it here. Okay, can you all see this?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the Parkinson's information session that is actually not my creation. So in full disclosure, it was created by the Parkinson's Voice Project, which is based in Richardson, Texas, a suburb of Dallas. And it is a nonprofit that created this program that we're going to be talking about today. And I'll be diving into more of the Speak Out program. Just a quick overview for those of you who have maybe lived with Parkinson's for some time or have just heard of it from your friends. A comparative program, very different, but something that you might be able to kind of understand is the Lee Silverman voice treatment, or LSVT. So LSVT focuses more on being loud, and maybe some of you have gone through that. And it has kind of some different philosophies. So I just want to throw that out there today to keep in mind as you learn what you're about to learn from this presentation. You'll see that there may be some similarities, but there's also some differences in the underlying principle of the Speak Out program. All right, let's see if this is going to work. So kind of a quick overview that they include in their presentation is that Parkinson's is named after Dr. James Parkinson's, who initially described it as, the shaking palsy in the 1800s. And he was the first known to medically describe the condition. And I think this is a great quote. I would read it to you all at the moment, but my screen is being a little funny and I don't want to mess up the presentation. Rick, do you want to read it for me?
Yeah, I had myself muted. Here it is. So slight and nearly imperceptible are the first inroads of this malady, and so extremely slow in its progress, that it rarely happens that the patient can form any recollection of the precise period of its commencement.
Great, thank you. All right, so that was an excerpt from the essay on the shaking palsy. Some of the early symptoms of Parkinson's that I'm sure many of you can relate to would be defined as the tremor in one extremity, shoulder pain, foot cramping, constipation, sleep disturbances, reduced writing size. And I would say most of these resonate with many of the folks who I work with. Everyone looks differently. You've met one person with Parkinson's, you've met one person with Parkinson's, but there's a lot of similarities that may appear for different folks, different constellations. As I think many of us know, April, which the month we're in, is Parkinson's Awareness Month. And it was April 11th is the Awareness Day in honor of, Dr. James Parkinson's birthday. And here's the signifying tulip. So a little bit after Parkinson's time, Dr. Parkinson's time, along came Dr. Charcot, a French neurologist who kind of further refined the description of Parkinson's. And this is when, even at this time period with the medicine they had in the late, in the 1800s, he started to differentiate Parkinson's from multiple sclerosis and maybe some of those other progressive neurological diseases that were present even at that time. And in fact, he was the one who suggested the name change from the shaking palsy to Parkinson's disease in honor of Dr. James Parkinson's. He also noted that not all patients have a tremor, which I have actually worked and met a few folks who fall into that category, and that most patients with Parkinson's are not markedly weak. And I just contrasting that with other diseases such as multiple sclerosis or ALS. There are other progressive neurological diseases that truly do create weakness. And we're going to learn more about the specifics of Parkinson's here, how they differ. All right. So Parkinson's is characterized by reduced amplitude of movement. And if you think about that and what you're living with in your own life and your own experiences, that can mean smaller walking, smaller writing, and smaller voice. So smaller movement overall. And that looks different, right, in different aspects of what we're doing, depending on what task we're trying to tackle. So another thing to kind of keep in mind, and I guess in comparison to some of those other diseases that I just mentioned, muscles become weak because they're not used to their fullest capacity. It's not because Parkinson's is making them weak. So if someone is sedentary and not exercising and not moving, anyone would develop weakness. But it's not Parkinson's that's causing a muscle weakness. Now, there are many folks who may be living with comorbidities and other things going on, and there may be exceptions. But by and large, Parkinson's disease itself is not causing muscle weakness. So the 4 cardinal symptoms, and we'll get into more of this on the next slide, would be a resting tremor, slowness of movement, impaired balance, and rigidity or that stiffness you might experience. So these are the 4 cardinal symptoms, and you don't have to memorize them, but you can just note that they are important because they have to be present in order to help make the diagnosis. So in reviewing this, I would say this actually holds true to my own personal experiences in a way of how my father was diagnosed in 2019. So Parkinson's is typically diagnosed through a thorough case history that your neurologist will obtain, the neurological exam itself when you meet the neurologist or possibly movement disorder specialist. There may be a CT or an MRI or other blood tests that they may carry out to rule out, any other diseases. I believe my father had a CT done to kind of rule out and look at things. And then again, those 4 cardinal symptoms that I just read off, 2 of the 4 of them have to be present as part of this diagnosis process. So there needs to be at least 2 of those 4. And also, as some of you may recall, they will start you on L-DOPA, carbidopa, or a version of Sinemet typically early on to see if there's a positive response to the PD medication and how your body responds. And that gives your neurologist more information on how you respond, and is this probably more likely Parkinson's versus another form of Parkinsonism or progressive supranuclear palsy or some of those other diseases that may look similar. And then next, I don't know if everyone would go through this, but it is available, and the technology is there, which would be a DAT scan, and I'll show you that next. So this is a specific scan of imaging that reveals the levels of dopamine in the brain, and we'll be talking more about dopamine. And you can see on the left, there is the normal level of dopamine in a typical neurotypical brain. And then you can see on the right, there's the abnormal, which is a much smaller little illuminated area. So that is significant in diagnosing if this method is used, because it shows you there's less dopamine in the basal ganglia, which is really the crux of Parkinson's disease. All right, so what causes Parkinson's? Well, as I just mentioned, dopamine. So the neurons that produce the chemical called dopamine they've died off, or they have become impaired. And this was kind of shocking to me, but when I went through the initial training of Speak Out after my father's diagnosis, it was interesting to learn that 80% of the dopamine producing cells are lost by the time you are actually showing motor symptoms. So by the time someone is developing the rigidity, the stiffness, bradykinesia, maybe dysarthria is showing up in their speech, and even if there's a resting tremor, a lot of, you have about 20% of the dopamine left to work with in your brain. So I think that's kind of something interesting to consider. And dopamine is significant because it's a neurotransmitter that transmits impulses from one neuron to the next for the planning and control of automatic muscle movements. And I'm going to show you another slide so to further explain that. But without enough dopamine, automatic movements are disrupted. And so that we're going to dive into deeper, but I want you to remember what I distinguish here. Automatic movements are disrupted. That's kind of key to remember. Oh, for some reason, I cannot advance here. Uh-oh. I don't know what's happened. Hold on. Rick, are you able to stop the screen share again?
Yeah, hold on 1 minute.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you. My apology. I don't know what's happening. I didn't change anything.
Technology is like that.
Yeah, I feel like this isn't the prettiest version, but I think I'm going to leave it in this format so that I don't have any more interruptions. Let me just share it with you all. Okay, let me try it this way. Hopefully I can access. Can you all see this?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to leave it in this mode so I still have control. So my apologies, it's not as pretty. I have a Mac. I think that's the issue here. Okay, so explaining more about dopamine and what that means and how it looks is that we have a cell body, you have an axon, and then the other end of the cell is the terminals. And so in order to talk to the neighboring cell, there's this little synaptic gap, and that is where dopamine comes in. So dopamine is released into this synaptic gap and acts like a bridge, and it helps transmit the information from one neuron to the next. So you may think like, oh, well, what does that mean? But if you think about it, that's where automatic movement gets disrupted because we have less dopamine to work with. And that's why we take L-Dopa and Cinemet and the medications to help provide our body, if you're living with Parkinson's, to provide your body with more dopamine. So as I just said, with less dopamine, automatic movements are disrupted. So let's think here for a second what an automatic movement might look like. Let me zone that out here. Okay, so an automatic movement might mean walking, talking, swallowing, blinking, swinging your arms while walking, just getting out of a chair, picking up your fork or cup. There's a lot of things we all do as adults automatically that we're not thinking about. I'm not thinking about talking right now. I'm not thinking about my breathing. I'm just talking. Now, I can tell you in my experience working with people with Parkinson's and my own father, this is not automatic anymore. It has to be something you think about, which is what we're going to get into. Where is my, okay. And in fact, the production of speech is a highly automatic behavior. We receive information coming in, we process an answer, and we respond. And that's all happening for many of us automatically, except when you layer in having Parkinson's. That's a game changer. That's not going to happen as automatic. As many folks tell me, word finding, thought organization, there's a lot of things that become complicated by Parkinson's, and it's very hard to sometimes quickly respond or come up with the answer or find the words you want in that moment. And also being heard and coordinating your breath and with your speech, and having your volume be loud enough and your speech be precise enough for someone to understand. So those are all highly automatic things that I'm doing right now without thinking about. That said, we're going to learn more about how that looks differently with Parkinson's. All right, so not to be doom and gloom here, but 90% of individuals with Parkinson's disease are likely to develop speech disorders. And I will tell you, many of the folks I work with had not ever had seen a speech therapist before. And some had been living with the disease for some time. Some are very proactive and they want to tackle things early, which is the approach I've taken with my own father. But if it wasn't for me, he would not have sought out speech therapy yet either, I can promise. And I actually just assessed a lovely woman who I know in the community who's lived with it for 34 years. And I was shocked to know she had never seen a speech therapist, which is amazing. And she's lived with Parkinson's for decades. So it's very vital that everyone see a speech therapist. And I'm not talking me, I'm talking any speech therapist you have access to within your medical group or setting, because there's important things you want to monitor and know and better understand about the disease. Another concerning factor, but is very, very true and holds true in my clinical experience, is that aspiration pneumonia is reported as the most common cause of death. And that is estimated to account for about 70%. So an aspiration pneumonia, for some of you who may not understand that term, many know what pneumonia is. An aspiration pneumonia means that food or liquid has entered the lungs and is considered a foreign material. And that will set into a type of pneumonia that can be very, unfortunately, deadly for folks. We all aspirate from time to time when food or liquid goes down the wrong pipe, but this would probably be more of a chronic or more of a severe situation where that is happening frequently. Okay, early signs of a speech disorder, and some of this may hold true for some of you in your own personal experiences, or you've been told by loved ones. Reduced vocal volume, hoarse sounding vocal quality. A lot of folks complain to me they feel like they sound hoarse, or their voice is raspier or more strangled. You know, there's different ways people describe it. Frequent throat clearing, where folks kind of, and I think that also in my experience becomes a habit for folks because you feel the need to clear your throat because you do sound hoarse, and sometimes you feel it's going to help improve that. But repeated throat clearing can also be abusive to your voice over time. The speech will trail off at the end of a sentence. So someone starts strong. Hi, my name is Sarah. I live in Walnut Creek, California. And the voice will drop and your speech will drop. And that can make it very hard to be heard by others, especially in a noisy setting and or over the telephone when someone is not looking at you. And then there can also be inconsistent production of the voice. So maybe your voice is stronger in the morning. By middle of the day, you're losing steam and your voice is not as strong as it started. Or maybe conversely, your voice is stronger in the evenings. I would also say anecdotally, an early signs of a speech disorder is that the individual living with Parkinson's feels that their loved ones have hearing loss. And they feel that it is not their voice and that it is their spouse or significant other has a hearing loss and that they need a hearing aid. And probably 8 times out of 10, that doesn't hold true. Now, there are cases where loved ones do wear hearing aids, but often it is because the person with Parkinson's is not able to perceive how their voice sounds. And you sound louder to yourself than how you're actually being heard by others. And that's kind of a sensory deficit that can happen with Parkinson's. Also true with movement. You think you're moving your arms and maybe you're not moving them to the extent that you think you are. So there's a perception that happens, a sensory deficit, and that really recognizing how much you're moving your body, how loud you're talking. And so it's not always the loved one with the hearing loss. Okay, so we're gonna watch a video. I'm hoping this is going to, let me do one quick thing here. Make sure the sound, okay, good. The sound needs to be turned on. So I'm going to share this video with you, and you're going to kind of see a pre and post treatment, and it will be identified on the slide.
Jacqueline Ann Sprower.
Jacqueline Ann Sprower.
I can lose my voice, yeah.
Okay. What else have you noticed?
As far as voice is concerned,
Yes.
nothing really, unless my husband can remember something I can't.
Okay. Has anyone said anything to you about your voice?
Well, sometimes my daughter will say, clear your throat, or my husband will say, clear your throat. When the sunlight strikes raindrops in the air, they act like a prism and form a rainbow.
The rainbow is a division of white light into many beautiful colors.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,
9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. I've noticed that I speak with clarity and I articulate better. And I speak with intent.
Okay, so we'll see some more examples of that, but I think that's a good example of how someone sounds with living with Parkinson's before and then after they've gone through this Speak Out program, which I'm going to break out for you more. So that's just kind of a before and after, and I think it's very powerful to see the difference in Jackie's voice and how the progress and improvement she made. As we mentioned, related to the aspiration pneumonia, early signs of a swallowing disorder, and some of you may experience difficulty with your swallowing, can be drooling and coughing during or soon after eating or drinking. So you may be coughing during a meal or maybe right after you've swallowed, and that might be your body's way of trying to protect and protect the airway, because we do not want food and liquid going into your lungs. That's how we protect ourselves from aspiration. And then drooling, I forgot to mention, can often be, as we talked about, those automatic functions and things that happen automatically that differ and change when you have Parkinson's, that there's less swallowing happening. So there's nowhere for the saliva to go unless we actively think about swallowing, and that's happening more frequently. So we'll often escape at the corners of someone's mouth or come out in other ways. So that's where drooling can come into play. And I know it's kind of an annoyance and an embarrassment for a lot of folks. Sensation of food or pills getting stuck in the throat. So if there's that reduced amplitude of movement and one is just kind of swallowing their old way, you got to kick it up a notch. There needs to be an effortful swallow. There needs to be a little bit more intent behind your swallow, because you really want to get it cleared and into your esophagus. It often leaves that sensation of things feeling stuck. Another sign of a swallowing disorder, and something to keep track of, is if anyone's experienced unexplained weight loss, because that's, if you're not trying to lose weight, then you really don't want to be losing a significant amount of weight that you weren't planning. Maybe you're eating less, maybe you're losing your appetite and meals aren't as exciting or safe because you're concerned about swallowing. There's a lot of things that go into swallowing. So if you're experiencing any of these things, I would encourage you to meet with your doctor or get a referral to see a speech therapist and see what steps are needed to further identify. Some of you also may have gone through a modified barium swallow study at some point in your journey, possibly if you've had swallowing issues that can take a different look at your swallow under fluoroscopy. Not that everyone needs that, but at a minimum, a clinical swallow evaluation would be advised if you're experiencing any of these symptoms. All right, so that's all kind of the doom and gloom of this, not the fun side of Parkinson's. But here's some good news that can come out of learning more about today, learning more about the Speak Out program and what it has to offer. So as humans, we have two motor systems. We have our extrapyramidal and our pyramidal. Rick, I think someone's not on mute. Okay. No worries, just for your video quality. Okay, so here is what that looks like. Our extrapyramidal system is the automatic system. So remember that we've talked a lot about automatic movement and how that is now disrupted because of the lack of dopamine due to Parkinson's. So we have the pyramidal system, which is the buddy motor system, and that is the intentional motor system. So just contrastly, look here, you have these two little purple things that look like a jelly bean. Well, that's the substantia nigra. That's that deep part in your midbrain where the dopamine is housed. Well, we know there's less dopamine, right? That's why we're taking Cinemet and other medications to supplement. If you try to do things the old way, the automatic way, all of these green lines indicate the amount of neurons and firing and connections that need to happen when you're doing it the old way. Granted, we're working with the same amount of dopamine in both brains here, that we're about that 20% reserve that's left. If you do things with intent and the intentional way, and you tap into your pyramidal system, you look how far few connections and neural activity is needed, again, with that same 20% of dopamine. So contrastly, doing things the automatic way is not going to be as effective and efficient as trying to do things with intent and purpose. And that is the crux of the Speak Out program. And I would say this is one of the defining differences between this program and LSVT, for those of you who may be familiar with that program. I'm personally not trained in it as a clinician. However, it has been around all of my career and before. And when I was in grad school, this was way before Speak Out came on the scene. And we'll talk more about how it became on the scene and developed. But examples of using intent, and you can also probably reflect, would be your first job interview and being intentional in what you're saying and how you're answering. You're very focused and present. Driving on the freeway, even turning off the radio so you can be more focused while driving, or driving when it's raining and there's a lot to take in. Exercising with intent. I know many folks with Parkinson's, exercise is so important, we know, and many folks love rock steady boxing and that type of fitness. And there's a lot of intention in doing that because you are hitting a bag and you are punching and you're very intentional in your movement, as an example. When you're playing basketball, if you can remember years back, playing basketball, standing on the free throw line and having to make that basket, you're very intentional trying to get the ball in the hoop. For those of you who might play golf or tennis, same idea. You're very intentional when you're teeing off or when you're serving a ball. Your brain is very focused on those activities. And yes, giving this presentation requires a great deal of intent and focus to be deliberate and clear. Okay, so here we're going to see a video that's automatic speech versus intentional speech. And I think this, I hope, will be very eye-opening for you all.
I was good at practice and having many efforts, many times. She gets the idea what she was good upon it. And I wasn't much stronger, much clearer. The words are more concise. I sound like a human being.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15.
My wife has noticed it more than I, but apparently I've lost a lot of voice. Only as part of this process did I learn that I had relinquished control of my voice and relinquished a significant part of my life, which is being sociable and social, and now I think I'm back in charge. I'm on my way to being back in charge.
It's much softer and more difficult to speak. I speak louder, clearer, and with intent.
Okay. I love the little music they play as an intro to those slides. I think that is the testimony. I mean, and those folks, as you noted there, were had previously had deep brain stimulation or DBS done. So the fact that their speech had improved that much is great, considering DBS can wreak havoc on many folks' speech and voice. And I imagine there may be some questions about that at the end, but you can see in the beginning when they were speaking, they were just talking normally. They were just answering the questions and just kind of describing their speech and voice. When they switched over and you saw the contrasting video of their intent, everything improved. The clarity, the volume, the articulatory precision, they just sounded completely different. And you know, someone may start to sound more like their old self in their old voice when they really apply intent. I know I can hear more of my dad's old voice, his voice, when he's using intent than versus when he's just kind of speaking automatically and not conscious of it. He sounds more like his old self to me, and I can hear that difference. All right, so this idea of intent and automatic, how these systems work, was really the brainchild of the late Dr. Daniel R. Boone, who was a well-known and reputable speech pathologist and professor in my field. In the late 50s, he was working in Cleveland at Highland View Hospital, and he was working with different folks with Parkinson's. And he noticed as part of his exam, you know, that we might have someone do, when counting forwards and using that automatic system, the speech would start off maybe great and then pick up and just drop off, or someone would start to rush, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And there was just that lack of control and a distinction and a change in someone's speech, tapping into the automatic system and just the rote nature of counting. So then he tried having folks count backwards, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. And just that simple arrangement and switching of it tapped into the intentional system. And that was kind of the discovery of how these two motor systems contrast, the extrapyramidal and the pyramidal, when it comes to someone living with Parkinson's. So he was a great supporter of the Speak Out program in his time, and supported the research and the development behind this program. And they to this day they honor him in many ways at the Parkinson's Voice Project. So this program, Speak Out, as I mentioned, created by the Parkinson's Voice Project, teaches individuals with Parkinson's how to convert speech from an automatic function to an intentional act. And I can say that's sometimes easier said than done, but when you really learn and you can hear that difference in your speech, it can be a complete night and day difference. So the intent part of this is that diagram I showed you with the green and the less connections needed on the pyramidal system. So that's what we're tapping into by using intention and requiring far less dopamine. So the Speak Out program, here's their little logo in the middle, begins with a Speak Out evaluation with a trained speech pathologist in their program, someone who's gone through their certification. There's an info session video that's about 14 minutes. That's very helpful to kind of give you an overview of what therapy looks like. The Speak Out program itself, typically, we'll get into more detail, but it typically is 8 to 12 sessions, depending on the individual's needs. In a perfect world, there's a 6-week follow-up that would happen where you would check in with the clinician and make sure you're staying on track. And then the loud crowd is a continuation of the Speak Out program. And there's some differences I'll highlight of how they apply that now that we've lived through a pandemic. But with Speak Out, when you're in treatment, you're practicing twice daily, and then you're also going to continue your practice ongoing once daily. Speech and voice are so important with Parkinson's and the frustration of many, but probably the thing most people want to practice least, in my experience. And even the people who attend my loud crowd and the people who I love working with will all say it's probably not the highest priority on their list compared to attending their rock steady or their other classes, which I get are probably a little jazzier and exciting. But that honestly, it's going to be the ongoing practice that is going to make the difference. And I'll explain what that might look like more. This one I didn't have a chance to modify, but when the program was created, it did start with, it was intensive, about 4 weeks. It would be 12 therapy sessions, 3 days a week. Well, with the pandemic and going virtual and telehealth and all the things we've all lived through and started to enjoy, they've actually changed this and recommend that someone can meet with their clinician twice a week, whether in clinic or virtually, telehealth wise. And that third session a week would be supplemented by someone attending a loud crowd group, which I'll explain more. And attending that loud crowd group, so you're practicing with others and you're practicing in a skilled way versus practicing on your own. And then another blessing that's come out of the pandemic is that the Voice Project started creating Monday through Friday live recorded sessions that they feature through Facebook, and then they capture that recording and it's available on their website for later viewing. So you can go back, there's a library of recorded sessions. So Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. Central, one of the therapists at the Parkinson's Voice Project leads folks through a new Speak Out lesson. And they last, I'd say, about 30 minutes on average. So some folks that I know who do them regularly like to tune in, recorded, and then they fast forward through the parts they don't want it, like the chatter, and they want to just jump to the exercises. So that's something that's now available. So that would be the recommendation of that third time a week. So you would be looking at, on average, it would be twice a week with a therapist. And again, it would be up to 12 therapy sessions, and it really varies by the individual. Some folks can be done in 8 sessions and they have a handle of the exercises. And then depending on where someone is in their disease process, a session may be 30 to 40 minutes, or someone may need more time, up to 60. So I would say 40 minutes is probably a good average of length of a session. As I mentioned, there's daily home practice. I have here to show you, this is a workbook that when you begin treatment with a clinician, you can contact the Voice Project and tell them who you're working with, and they mail you this workbook free of charge. And to you, anyone in the US, it receives it free. And this is what your daily home practice would consist of. And each lesson is comprised of the 6 exercises you learn in your individual treatment with a clinician. And then while you're in treatment with that therapist and you're actively receiving speech therapy one-on-one, you're encouraged, and the recommendation is to practice twice daily. So you'd practice maybe in the morning, you might practice at night, whatever your schedule looks like. On a day you happen to be working with your therapist in person or via Zoom, that would count as one of your practice sessions, and then you would do a second one on your own. And also, now that the recorded sessions are available, that's another great alternative for someone who may not be as motivated to open up their workbook, but they could join a recorded session once a day as part of their practice. Embedded into the program, the 6th exercise that's always addressed is a cognitive exercise, and there's different versions of those, but it just taps into trying to think about something while actually having to think about your speech at the same time, which is sometimes easier said than done, to try to answer something, come up with a problem, an answer to a problem while also using your intent. And then really speaking with intent and kind of learning. It's never going to be automatic to speak with intent, but the more you practice, the easier you'll fall in, into that habit of trying to use your intent. It's a skill you have to build. It's like a muscle. You have to work it to fall into that using intent. For those of you who might still be working, that may be something you're already kind of aware of when you're on a video call or a conference call for work, and how you might have to apply more intent when you're communicating. So the use of intent can apply, I would say, well beyond just speech and voice and kind of what we're talking about today. So walking with intent, and I have some videos to show you that difference. Writing with intent, the micrographia many of you might experience, the smaller handwriting. And then of course, speaking with intent. And what it really means, and what you have to learn in treatment with your therapist, is how to be focused, and you're concentrating, and you're really thinking about it. You're saying it like you mean it. You're not yelling. It's not going to sound aggressive. It may sound loud to you as the person living with Parkinson's because of that sensory deficit I mentioned, but I guarantee someone's going to hear you a lot better. But again, you have to be very focused, and you take that intent, and by just doing that, you're activating that pyramidal system, and it makes the world of difference. So living less out of habit and more out of intent is really the message here in terms of this program and how you can apply it to other areas of your life. So check out these gentlemen as they walk down the hall at the Parkinson's Voice Project, and you'll see side by side intent and just kind of their plain old walk without being intentional. Okay, so you can see how it applies beyond just speech and voice into other areas. And as many of you know, living with the disease, that Parkinson's is a movement disorder that is battled by moving. That is why exercise is so important for all of you. And the same is true for exercising your voice and practicing your speech, because that is an exercise in and of itself to functionally improve your communication. So as many of you know, or your loved ones may know, that dopamine is responsible for our motivation and our drive. So we know that that's something many folks can struggle with living with Parkinson's. So without enough dopamine, you may not want that challenge of having to take on a new exercise or a new program, or to commit to one more thing to do. I work with a gentleman who says having Parkinson's is a full-time job, because he's attending different classes. He's got his whole schedule all day, well, not all day, but most days of the week. He's got something that he's attending and participating in to improve his life with Parkinson's. So I can completely relate with his thoughts on that. So what can be a way to motivate yourself outside of having external family or support from those in your life is setting a routine. In terms of physical fitness, people join a gym, and that can be motivating, right? Exercising with a friend. And the same is true for attending a loud crowd. I currently am able to offer 2 loud crowds classes a week, one in the afternoon and one in the morning. And I have on average 3 to 5 folks, I would say, who attend either class. My morning class tends to be a little larger. And so that has built great camaraderie. People have gotten to know each other. We're going through the speak out exercises. We follow the protocol, but at the same time, we're having fun. And people also share. There's support in the group as well, and what someone may be dealing with. So just attending a loud crowd can be a motivational way to keep yourself accountable, to keep up your practice. So again, to recap, there's the speech evaluation with the trained clinician. You will find many speech therapists out there who may be trained in LSVT and or speak out, or someone like myself who's only trained in speak out, or a clinician who's only trained in LSVT. So you might want to tease that out if you're trying to connect with a speech therapist. And for those of you with Medicare, skilled speech therapy is a covered benefit You would want to look into your benefits and see where you are with your rehabilitation dollars for a calendar year. However, there's always an exception that can be made in terms of making the case for skilled speech therapy if someone is living with a disease such as Parkinson's and there's a justifiable need for the service. So some of you may also receive physical and or occupational therapy services, and that is fantastic. So you just want to let your speech therapist know in advance so that he or she can look into that and just kind of have a sense of how to propose it to Medicare to make sure that it does get approved. Speak Out itself, as I mentioned, is about 8 to 12 sessions on average. Someone with DBS who has undergone DBS may need up to those 12 sessions potentially, just because, as you know, living with DBS, if you've had that done, there's changes that happen to your speech and voice because of the changes in the settings needed to improve your motor symptoms. So there's a trade-off with the motor symptoms and the speech and voice symptoms. So it kind of, every person is different who I meet who's had DBS. So that may look different for each individual. As I said, in a perfect world, and depending on what clinic and therapist you're able to work with, you would follow up with 6 weeks and just check in and make sure you're staying on track, you're staying motivated, you're keeping up your practice, that things haven't regressed. You just kind of want to check in. And then attending a loud crowd, especially early on, even while you're in treatment with a speech therapist, can be vital because it will help keep you accountable and keep your skills up where they need to be and help you be aware of how you're practicing. Let's see.
So Sarah, are you ready for some Q&A?
Yes, I think we've covered the majority of it, Rick. I think there's really, I would refer you to their website. And then here's my contact information that I'll leave up on the slide to capture. So if anyone has questions to reach out offline, but I'll go ahead and stop screen sharing and take some questions now.
Okay, the rule of the road is really simple. You need to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question. So who would like to go first?
Rick, I'll go if no one else is going to jump in. This is Gil Peterson. Hi, Sarah. Can you hear
Hi,
me?
I hear you. Yep.
Can you hear me? All right. What is the difference between the Speak Out program and the other, or was it LSTD?
LSVT.
VT, excuse me. Yes. What's the fundamental difference?
Okay, good question. I would say that, then as I mentioned, I'm not trained in LSVT, but what I know about it as a program is that their motto is think loud, be loud, big movement for the physical therapy side of their program. So it's more about being loud and increasing volume, which can be very effective for some individuals with Parkinson's. And so contrastly, Speak Out, as I shared on the slides about the brain and the extrapyramidal and the pyramidal system, really taps into using your pyramidal system and your intent. And when someone uses intention, it looks, as you saw in those videos, markedly different than their automatic speech. So the volume typically improves, the speech clarity improves, even their tone, lack of monotone, the monotone voice may improve. There's many improvements that can happen by being very intentional with your communication versus just speaking automatically and living with Parkinson's. Does that answer your question, Gil?
Yes, as a byproduct of that, the one sort of follow-up, do you find that when you're living intentionally, you're more confident?
Well, I'm not living with Parkinson's, but I would say that I think the patients, like especially demonstrated in the videos we saw today, I think you would become more confident as an individual because you can tap into that skill and ability and you want to be heard. You want to get your needs met. You want to express your ideas. You want to be a part of the group. And if you have that in your pocket and you can do it, then of course you're going to be more confident to be out in the community, socializing, managing your appointments, everything that's still within your skill set to manage. I mean, I would say it would give someone more confidence to be, to communicate versus wanting to withdraw because nobody can hear them, or their voice is too soft, or people complain about their voice and then they want to throw in the towel. And we don't want to see that happen.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
What about if somebody is in Kaiser and they've gone through their speech therapy or seen an individual speech therapist? Would they then contact someone like you?
That's a good question, Rick. I know Kaiser, some of the therapists, at least here in the Diablo service area, and I believe in the Oakland area as well, because I work with some folks in the Berkeley area. I believe Kaiser has kind of done their own version of it, and I know they're impacted by their number of members that they need to serve effectively. I have been told by members that they have indeed, I don't know where I put my book at the moment, but they have received their workbook from a Kaiser clinician, and hopefully they've had at least some exposure to the exercises with their Kaiser speech pathologist. So if that is the case and someone has been given the speech therapy, this speak out workbook, or been provided by way of their Kaiser therapist, and they have a general sense, then yes, folks, I do have folks with Kaiser who join my Loud Crowd. The reason there's a caveat to that is that the Parkinson's Voice Project doesn't really let me call and order the workbook for the patient. I always provide my patient with the information and sometimes the email, if that's easier for them to communicate. And they need to say, hey, I'm working with Sarah Talick. They know on their end that I'm a trained clinician. And then they say, sure, no problem. What's your name? What's your address? And they'll mail it to you. But it has to come from the patient. That's how they operate. And so that's why if a clinician has helped the patient, a Kaiser member, through those steps, then that tells me that they are on, kind of in the realm of speak out, if that makes sense. Like they're working towards that treatment.
Rich Davidson.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
I actually did do the Speak Out program through Kaiser.
Oh,
And
great.
you're right. I had to write or call and get the book myself, and I made a donation to the organization in compensation, although it's not required. What I wanted to check, and then I went through the exercises with my Kaiser speech therapist. And what I've been doing on my own since then, I don't always go through the full exercise on my own each day. But when I'm in the car, I go through the me, me, my, mo, moo, the up scale up and down, and then some counting. Does that seem to you like a good process to do if I'm not going to go through the entire 30-minute daily exercise?
Well, I see two sides of it, Rich. Yes, what you're telling me is what most people do that are honest with me about what they're doing with their daily practice. So I hear you. And again, like I mentioned, it's not as glamorous or fun as like punching a heavy bag, like rock steady boxing. So a lot of folks can lose motivation with the practice, especially if you're working from that same workbook that you already have, right? You're going to have to keep it fresh, some of the activities. But I would say the ones that you mentioned are all great ways to kind of warm up your voice if you're driving and you're going somewhere and you're going to be speaking, which is maybe why you're doing it. And a lot of folks do like to practice in the car. And maybe that's something too about the privacy of being in the car. Like some folks like to sing in the car when they're alone, because when you're practicing, you're a little bit loud, right? And so some folks do tell me they like to practice in the car for those still driving. So I don't think there's any harm in what you were doing, but I would encourage you to try to sometimes at least practice the reading and the cognitive. And or to tune in, join my Loud Crowd, connect with me and I'll get you the information, or do the recorded sessions a few times a week through the Voice Project, just to kind of keep it fresh. And like I said, a lot of folks just fast forward through the chatter, and they do a great job. They mix it up. It can be entertaining sometimes. And then they do have to give a lot of information because they have new folks joining all the time. So sometimes for someone who's been doing it a while, they feel it gets repetitive in the recorded sessions. But if you really want to just get to the exercises, you just kind of, slide the cursor and move on.
Thanks.
To less than 30 minutes. Okay.
Is there a cost to your Loud Crowd program?
No, my Loud Crowd is free. I try to honor the program itself, and that is the philosophy of the Voice Project, and especially given that they are a nonprofit. So my Loud Crowds are both free, the two that I currently hold. And I would much rather do that than have to bill, 15 people a month. So I would rather maintain philosophy and the heart of the program. And having said that, someone has already gone through the therapy like Rich, so they've already gone through skilled speech therapy. So there's already been a cost associated with that to some extent.
Janice, you had your hand up?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Have you in your practice seen any impact on drooling as someone speaks more with intent?
That's a good question, Janice. To be honest, I have seen some folks in person in the pandemic, but a lot of the therapy has happened over teletherapy. But I will say, I do notice occasionally there's some folks, there was a woman I've worked with who lives with PSP, progressive supranuclear palsy. And so she will sometimes dab the corners when she's experiencing it. So she may be experiencing more drooling. It's hard to know, but she's kind of living with that throughout her day. But I think it could be managed or addressed in treatment.
Because there is some type of interaction between speech, swallowing, and drooling.
Yeah, and that it kind of goes back to that automatic function. If you're just not swallowing as frequently as you and I are. And so you almost have to probably actively swallow and become a new habit before speaking, if you feel that that's going to interfere with your speech. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, but it's an aspect of it.
Right.
Because I know that, frequently your swallowing is measured or tested when you go to a speech therapist. But then it seems to me that I haven't heard of any specific instructions about swallowing. It's more about speech rather than. So I was just curious about these other aspects of it.
Right. And I think I understand what you're saying, that more commonly the drooling comes up associated with the swallowing aspect of Parkinson's. But yes, it does cross over and can interfere with speech.
Right.
So it does become a nuisance for many folks, whether they're talking or not. But I would say having to be intentional and heart, like kind of the crux of what we talked about today, really thinking about taking that conscious swallow before you're going to speak, because you may, and depending on medication someone may be on, they may have excessive saliva. There's a lot of variables of what causes someone to have more saliva than the next person living with Parkinson's.
Yeah.
But I think it's just more that intentional act of thinking, okay, need to swallow. Does that help, Janice?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, no problem.
All right, folks, so we're getting near 1 o'clock, or it is our ending time. I misspelled Talic speech therapy, by the way, in the chat window there. And I want to let everyone know that this presentation has been recorded and we will have it up on our YouTube channel within 48 hours. If there are slide presentations that we can share, Sarah, send me the link and we'll post them on our website as well.
Okay, I'll double check that with the Voice Project, Rick, and I'll get back to you.
Okay, thank you. Meanwhile, the information about the Parkinson Voice Project as well will be in the YouTube descriptions. So if you're a subscriber, as soon as that video goes up, you'll be notified. If not, we'll send an email if you're on the mailing list, and it will contain the link to the YouTube video. This has been a fantastic presentation, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me. And feel free to, text, call, or email with any follow-up questions you may have.
Thank you, Sarah.
All right, you're welcome.
Sarah.
Well, thank you all very much.
All right, take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.